I stood at the kitchen counter, gripping the edge so tightly my knuckles turned white. In the living room, the sound of laughter floated through the air. Her laughter. Emma's sweet, youthful voice filled the house as she spoke to my husband, Greg. My stomach twisted. It wasn't what she was saying, but how she said it. Her smile a little too bright, her laughter a little too carefree. And Greg. His eyes lingered on her in a way I couldn't ignore. I told myself it was innocent. She was just my daughter, his stepdaughter. But the sharp pang of jealousy in my chest told a different story. The line between familial love and something else entirely had become blurred in my mind, and I hated myself for it. It hadn't always been this way. Emma and I used to be close, inseparable even. But something shifted when Greg entered our lives. He was charming, attentive, everything I thought I wanted. Emma adored him from the start, always seeking his approval. At first, I thought it was sweet, but as the years went by, her bond with Greg seemed to grow stronger while ours weakened. Dinner that evening was unbearable. Emma sat beside Greg, her laughter echoing as they shared stories about their day. I tried to join the conversation, but every attempt felt forced, every word hollow. "Mom, are you okay?" Emma asked, her tone laced with concern that only made my resentment burn brighter. "I'm fine," I said curtly, avoiding her gaze. Later that night, I found myself standing outside Emma's bedroom door, listening to the faint sound of her voice. She was on the phone, giggling softly. I couldn't make out her words, but my imagination filled in the gaps. Was she talking about Greg? My heart raced at the thought. I shook my head, disgusted with myself. What kind of mother thought these things about her own daughter? The next morning, I noticed subtle changes. Emma's clothes, seemed more revealing, her makeup heavier. She spent more time in the living room, always finding excuses to be near Greg. And Greg, he didn't seem to mind. He laughed at her jokes, complimented her hair, her dress, her smile. The jealousy simmered, threatening to boil over. One evening, I caught Emma and Greg alone in the living room. She was sitting too close, her hand brushing his arm as she laughed at something he said. Greg leaned back, his smile easy, his eyes locked on hers. My heart pounded as I stepped into the room, my presence breaking the moment. "Am I interrupting?" I asked, my voice cold. Emma looked up, startled, while Greg simply smiled. "Of course not," he said smoothly, but his words did little to soothe the storm brewing inside me. That night, I confronted Greg. "You're too close to her," I blurted out, my voice trembling. He stared at me, stunned. "She's my stepdaughter," he said, his tone defensive. "You're imagining things." But the way his eyes shifted, the hesitation in his voice, it was enough to plant seeds of doubt that refused to go away. The final straw came one afternoon when I came home early from work. The house was quiet, too quiet. I found Emma and Greg in the kitchen, laughing softly. She was wearing one of his shirts, her hair messy as if she'd just woken up. My vision blurred as anger and betrayal surged through me. "What's going on here?" I demanded, my voice shaking. Emma froze, her eyes wide with guilt. Greg stepped forward, his expression calm but firm. "Nothing is going on," he said, his tone steady. "You're letting your insecurities control you." But I wasn't convinced. The tension in the room was suffocating as I turned and walked away, my mind racing with thoughts I couldn't contain. That night, I sat Emma down. "I need to know the truth," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. She looked at me, confused. "Mom, what are you talking about?" I hesitated, the words catching in my throat. "You and Greg, are you—" I couldn't finish the sentence. Her face twisted in horror. "What? No. How could you even think that?" Tears filled her eyes as she stood, trembling. "You're supposed to trust me." Greg entered the room then, his expression a mix of anger and disappointment. "This ends now," he said firmly. "You're tearing this family apart with your paranoia." His words hit me like a slap. I realized with a sinking heart that my jealousy and insecurities had poisoned everything. In the end, it wasn't about Emma or Greg. It was about me, my fears, my doubts, my inability to let go of control. The damage was done, but as I sat alone in the silence, I vowed to rebuild, to trust again, to let go of the toxic emotions that had consumed me.